Are you all good? Yes. Oh, come on, come on. Are we good? Yes. Are we good? Yes. All right. Good morning. I'm Duke. I'm going to be your presenter today on an interesting topic. I'm hoping that most of what brought people here was some form of an addiction, a desire to be addicted. Not really. How to bring people to your websites on a recurring basis, or how to bring them to an application on a recurring basis. The core of this talk is built around a book written by Nir Eyal that we're going to walk through his model. It's called the Hooked Model. And it's about how you create a habit-forming application or a website like that. And what brought me on this journey is kind of an interesting one. Because I come from that part of the world. That part of the world is first of all, Park City is this little tiny blue dot in a very red state. And of course, we had some interesting experiences in the last week. That's why I'm glad I'm in Canada, may not head back home. But from my point of view of the world, it's a nice, safe environment. It's a lot of fun. We don't have many people traveling all that far to Colorado to stock up on addictive substances. But I have a nephew who's doesn't quite live this kind of lifestyle that I live. That he's not up in the mountains being healthy and experiencing things that I do in the wintertime as a volunteer ski patroller. And he unfortunately in his high school years fell off the wagon a few times. He managed to get himself arrested for a DUI 3 times in 2 months. Really, really profound. That's kind of started my journey into this direction. And in particular, hooking up with someone who is a specialist in this particular field. And it's just fate that brought us together. He was looking for a web designer to help in his life coaching business. At the same time, I was looking for solutions for this young man who's troubled, having a very hard time in life in Southern California, where there are plenty of sources of and ways to have an inadequate lifestyle, shall we say. So you've seen a few pictures about where I came from, but the project I'm talking about is called the Elevating Project. And this is a new open source project. We have not rolled out the first version yet, so you're not going to find it online yet. But the Elevating Project is first and foremost a nonlinear learning management system. And part of it is based on Joomla. This is why we're here today. So it is a way to use the Joomla engine as a curation engine for content that is then delivered through devices, smartphones. And so we'll get into the project in a little bit, but we're first going to go through the Hooked Model. The first use of the project is going to be recovery elevated, content related to substance abuse recovery, helping people stay sober one click at a time. And so it's all about creating somewhat a habit-forming application, as habit-forming as social media is, that you got to connect every morning, so that people who are undergoing substance abuse recovery, who are working on their sobriety, have a place to go to stay engaged, to alleviate their boredom, to find new interests. This is the guy I talked about, Jim Peconin. He is the life coach that found me on a ski beach and said, I'm kind of looking for something that could serve as a more enhanced courseware. And at the same time, I had just finished reading this book, which is what brought it all together and said this might be something that's interesting. I do recommend the book. It's not the best writing style, but the concepts are wonderful. And at the end of the slides, I've got some excerpts out of the book that when you download the slides, you can use them as a guide. So, and the slides will, of course, be available. That should not be at that point. Did I hit the wrong button? I did. Yeah, we are lost in the slideshow. I hate it when that happens. Hide slide is not working. So, his point of view. He's a professor at Stanford University. He's in the marketing department and is on the trajectory of understanding how marketing and in particular how products can profoundly change our lives. And so they're looking for ways to make products that are sticky, to make, and in our case, websites that are sticky. And that there's a lot of money in that. If you can get someone coming to your website all day, every day, just like Facebook, there's a lot of money out there that can be made. And it all comes from using design patterns that are inherently designed to bring people back, repeat business, without you having to go out and solicit that business. So what's the primary trigger? What drives all this? Why do people come back to an application? Are they driven by pain or pleasure? How many say, hey, show of thumbs? How many say pain? How many say pleasure? Not to surprise you. We get into addictive stuff because we have a burning need. We have an itch that we want to scratch. We've got something that needs to be solved. And that we go to these types of solutions, not because we might want to be more pleasureful, but because we're solving a problem. We came there for a reason. We've got this pattern for a reason in our lives. And it is mining that particular thing that actually brings us there. So we'll go through what the particular triggers are for each of these applications. But there's a very clear trigger involved. And it creates a habit-forming application. It can be that you start by seeking pleasure. It could be that that's what brought you to a porn website in the first place. But what brings you there day after day or hour after hour is the pain of loneliness or the pain of withdrawal from having some form of gratification or things like that. It turns into a pain, and that's part of what drives. So, everyone close your eyes for just a moment. Yeah, relax a moment. You just heard the alarm go off on your cell phone that tells you a notification came in. What feeling are you feeling right now? And the answer is anxiety. You've got an elevated sense of concern. You've got an elevated sense of pain, in essence, that you don't know what's coming in there, and you're anticipating the issue. And it puts you on edge. It's not a satisfying issue. It's not that you're going to be connected with somebody and get excited. It's that it does put you on edge. And so it gives you an itch. And so you feel the need to scratch it. And whether it could be spam, it could be anything. People calling you for no other reasons that you don't really care about. You got to go scratch that itch if you don't really know what it is. And it's concerning. So we try to solve it. So we seek solutions to discomforts, whether solving that particular one or other ones. We're not trying to design to create an addiction, with the exception of the recovery elevated use case. We are actually there trying to create an electronic addiction. We are being on the dark side of the force on that one. But in general, as you're working on your websites, you're not trying to manipulate people. You're trying to really use that marketer's edge that challenges their frameworks and creates behavior that the person really doesn't want. So we're like food advertising, you get that really gorgeous photograph of the donut that makes you go out and crave sweets. I mean, we're not trying to do that type of crave creation that is destructive to people. Instead, we want to form habits. And not all habits are bad. So habits are things that you do sufficiently repetitively that they almost become thoughtless. That the cognitive noise that you've got to go through, the amount of processing, the amount of CPU cycles your brain has to go through to do something, if after a while we can deal with patterns in our life in a way that we can go through those cycles with less cognitive energy because we've seen the pattern before, we know a stereotype for what that pattern fits into, and therefore we will follow it again, then we develop a habit. That when the alarm goes off, we click the button whether we think about it or not. And it doesn't become a cognitive state of, well, gee, do I need to figure out who's calling me and therefore check the caller ID and before I answer the phone? No, we just hit the button to shut the damn ringer off because it's in the way of doing whatever we do. To form a habit, there are two drivers. First is frequency. There's a study that was done that very carefully went through what it takes for people to do flossing. So it was commissioned by the dental industry and what it took to create that habit. And it turned out that if they got the frequency to be at least once a week, but preferably once a day or more frequently, hourly, then the habit was much more likely to stick. So it is the frequency of it that makes it into muscle memory. If you're a performance athlete, you got to do something 10,000 times to reach Olympic level. And this is the same kind of thing. If you perform something frequently enough, it becomes that autonomic response. It just happens. And so as a designer, that's what we're aiming for. Second thing we need is an attitude change. That to make all of this work, we have to decide that having that particular habit is a good thing for us, that there's benefit to it, that we get whatever our itch is, that the scratch matches the itch. So there has to be some alignment to that. And if you can harness the habits, you get some very wonderful improvements to a bottom line. So if you're designing a website that needs to have a lot of repeat business or an application, this is how you get it. And as a result, you raise the total lifetime value of any particular customer. With that also comes a whole lot of flexibility. In particular, you become, if the action is habit forming, you become immune to price increases. Your customer is so used to going there that you could double the price and they won't even blink. They'll just keep coming because it's just part of what they do. And you send out that little change of terms of service and they just blow right past it because they just got to be there every day. It's just part of that process. So it supercharges your growth. It also increases defensibility. And what that means is once you have the habit set, you're not willing to change it very easily. It is so ingrained you don't want to learn. For example, we're Google. All of us have learned to go search something by using Google. How often do you jump over to Bing? Raise your hands. Who hit Bing this week? Who hit Yahoo this week? How many hit Google this week? It's hard to change off of Google simply because it takes so much more to displace them. It's not that any one search engine is any better than the other. In fact, on a blind study of the three side by side with all branding removed, people couldn't tell the difference in the results. They are equally reliable in doing the job of being a search engine. But once you've got that program muscle memory of how to start your search, that's the one you go to. And it takes a lot for someone to go bother to change the default search engine in their browser. Why change that habit if you don't need to? So it's a displacement activity. Forming new habits takes work, both on your part to design well, and it's a fairly careful design process you need to go through to figure this out, and on the part of the person who's forming the habit, because for a while they have to respond to the triggers you generate instead of their own. Forming habits, it tends to be exceptionally rare, doesn't happen very often, and our job is that we want to do it because for us, it might be part of our business requirement. It's part of why we are doing what we are doing with the website that we're building. That it's essential that we form the habit because how often, how much money would we make if we had to advertise for every time someone clicks on Twitter, if we're Twitter? You don't want to have to create the trigger externally by marketing techniques every time you want something to click. You want to get it so it's automatic, that they tweet whether you're doing anything or not, so that you don't have any cost of marketing involved. So you don't have to work at getting that matter of impression. In the process of lean startup, we talk about the different phases of lean startup and what it takes, and I have to tell you the build phase, the process of actually building an application is where all the energy is. All the money goes into it. So part of the design process you want to start picking up is working ahead of that before you spend a lot of money spend on code and so forth, is prototyping designs and doing some A/B testing to make sure that you've figured out what the internal triggers are. So now let's get into the model itself, what it really is about. With enough frequency, the whole idea of the model is to form a habit. And the first step of that model is to get some degree of engagement. It is to trigger an activity. So that's where the marketing activities comes in. That's where you're going to buy television advertisement, you're going to stick ads on various websites, you're going to do whatever it takes to get in the face of the person to the point where they're going to try it the first time and hopefully have a successful experience. That follows with their, actually leads to them responding to your call to action. They actually take the action. You need the action to be producing of the result that is intended. That there is a reward at the end of that action, and then finally that there is some degree of investment. We're going to go through these 4 steps individually. So first is the trigger. And habits are built progressively over time. It's like getting that muscle memory. You've got to have repetition. You have to go through it a lot. And when you're talking about triggers, there are internal and external triggers. So to start the cycle off, to kickstart this thing, to bootstrap it, you have to have an external trigger. Someone's not just going to, you build the website, they're just not going to magically come. It's not the field of dreams. You got to bring them there. So you've got to have that external trigger. But you hope over time to replace it with an internal trigger, such as the Twitter experience. So we're familiar with the external triggers in our environment all the time. They're just all around us, and it's big advertising money is spent on all these external triggers trying to get you to jump into some place. And then the internal triggers are what you do, what you build inside your own mind to solve your own needs. And this is where the habit forming part of it comes from, that you start generating a trigger that makes you take the action. So now as we're building a solution for somebody, we're actually looking into what is the trigger in their mind the moment before they're about to take the action we want them to take. When the external trigger was successful and brought them to your website to do whatever it is they are about to do, what was the internal trigger that coincided with that? What was the pain that you need to scratch? What's the itch you need to scratch? Understand what that is and how to harness it, and that becomes the internal trigger to repeat the process. So first time around, you first few dozen times around, you're externally triggering it through your advertising and so forth. But after a while, you're trying to figure out how to make that routine, how to find an emotional satisfier that will make someone come back and do that. And what triggers all this, we started out at the beginning, it happens to be not the pleasure, but the pain. It is all negative circumstances. It's all stuff that needs to be solved. So we're feeling lonesome or indecisive or a whole bunch of different situations that we are driven to respond to. Many studies out there, among those, when you're depressed, you check email more often because you're looking for connection. So your pain is that you're feeling lonely or withdrawn from the world, you're isolated. Therefore, you go to things that bring you engagement, and if we can anticipate what you're about to feel, that when you start feeling lonely and have the solution in front of you so it's easy to reach, we'll actually start to harness it. So when you feel lonely, what app do you go to? Everyone. Facebook or Instagram, both work, absolutely. When you are unsure of something, where do you go? Absolutely. I think I got that one backwards. And when you're bored, YouTube. And so, and when you're bored, where do you go? Very good. So we're about figuring out our customers' internal triggers. And part of what makes Instagram so habit-forming is it solved a specific issue that people had. That was how to retain memories. The first person to do that happened to be Kodak. And Kodak did this extremely well. But it took them 50 years and many, many millions of dollars to define the Kodak moment. That's huge advertising campaigns from when I was a kid, before the internet was built, that were all about how to just be that just right solution. And as a result, they sold cameras and film and got all those things going. But Instagram, they have solved that in a matter of a few keystrokes, and that with a much smaller advertising budget to get it kicked off, now it's just automatic. It grows itself. Who's their advertising world? It's other Instagram members who send it to their friends. And all of a sudden somebody sends you a photograph, you click through, you got to create an account on Instagram to see it, and all of a sudden you're logged in and you're part of the tribe. So it's in social media, you've got a whole lot more going on. And Instagram has capitalized on all aspects of social media, not just the need to protect photographs, but they're hooking into the way that we hook to other people. They're creating a community. They're resolving a stress that we have about capturing an experience, but it's also that urge to preserve a memory for a lifetime, to share with other people. Solves boredom, solves curiosity. So those are external triggers that become internal triggers. So what do we need to do next is we need to get the person to act on it. And part of the design phase here is finding the exact simplest action they need to take. In the old days, I think it's coming up next. What is the simple action that Pinterest uses? Pin it, or if you're just a consumer, what behavior did they just teach you to do? That they were the first to really come up with this behavior on a smartphone. Scrolling. It was a single action, a single motion. and you got more wealth, more surprise, more treasure was coming. And that sucked people in. And it's all it took. It was a very simple action. They didn't require you to log in. They didn't have any noise between you and the experience. Very, very simple process. Same idea for some of the other products. Google. You land on their page. It is the simplest page in the world in terms of design. There are always so many things you could do. You can play with little icons in the corner, but otherwise, fill in the box and search. You get instant gratification. You get lots and lots of search results. Likewise for YouTube, there's a play button. How hard is it to engage with it? And so as you're designing, you need to go through those kinds of thought processes to figure out how to accomplish the engagement. Rather well-known scientist by the name of B.J. Fogg came up with a formula to describe all this stuff, and it's kind of a minimum sufficiency activity. But in essence, to get the desired behavior, you need a combination of motivation, ability, and a trigger. So we've been talking about the triggers, but motivation is just the energy to take the action. You got to be enthused or excited or seeking something. So there are 6 things that are well-known causes of motivation, and they are pairs. They're opposites of each other. So you're either seeking pleasure or you're avoiding pain, seeking hope or avoiding fear, and seeking acceptance or avoiding rejection. So if you can capitalize on any of those in terms of the mechanics of the process you're building, that's what's going to start getting somebody motivated, emotionally invested enough that they're going to take the next step. What's this one all about? Clearly, seeking hope. It was a very strong and powerful campaign. And some were, this is one, who are they marketing to? Not just men. Not just men. Specifically, young boys. This is not for the older men who find this social, are at least modern enough to say this is socially distasteful. It is aimed at the young kids who are just discovering all this kind of a world, and in particular designing that. This one is on which aspect? Avoiding fear. This guy has got the brain of a 2-year-old at this point because he didn't wear his motorcycle helmet. So. And this one is all about seeking acceptance. So you want to be one of the buds at the Budweiser group. So the product is barely shown in this ad campaign. It's all about social connection as one of the main connectors. Next in that formula was ability. Do you have the ability to take the action? It doesn't particularly help to set somebody up for following your emotional trigger if, for example, your product costs $100,000 and they make $20,000 a year. You're out of reach. Just not possible to take the action. If it requires a degree of physical capability or physical fitness, and you're out of range. For example, in the weight loss industry, they don't sell as the final deliverable the 100-pound lighter person that you ultimately might seek to be. They are selling and are making habitual what you do each day to work towards the goal. So that's where Fitbit sells its watches, because it's helping you monitor every day. They're not selling themselves as a weight loss oriented program. They're about just simple health and how you can track it. And so, similarly for all the food alternatives, the Weight Watchers programs of the world. They're more about giving you some degree of social connection to people that are on the same program, who are solving the same issues, and more about getting you hooked up with a repetitive supply of their product, foods, that are aimed towards solving your issue. So you can analyze, using that formula, much more likely whether or not a trigger is going to work, and whether it's going to succeed, based upon whether you've met the minimums to have it both be able to be done with the least amount of motivation, doesn't require a lot of energy, effort, or commitment, and that it's being done with the easiest effort involved, that the action is very simple, that it doesn't take a lot to get in there. So if you can, the more that you can keep both of those to their bare minimum and analyze your workflow to keep it as simple as possible, the more likely you're going to succeed. Which one do you work on first, ability or motivation? Who says ability? Who says motivation? Ability is first. You're working on 100%. I'm proud of you. Ability is first. If you can take 8 clicks and reduce it to 2 clicks, the return on investment is much higher than putting out more advertising or more pain-raising awareness activities out there. Because you can put out all the motivation in the world, and if they get there and by click number 6 they have gotten bored and they have moved off topic, they've left you behind, or you've left them. So work on keeping the process as simple as possible first. Work on that ability aspect. Make it easy to reach. Twitter worked on this successfully over the years. You can see that if you look at the way that their homepage was designed. At the beginning, a ton of noise, lots of things to click on, mostly because the audience didn't quite understand what Twitter was yet, so they had to do some education. But over time, they learned to simplify and recognize people are coming there for 2 different reasons. They want to either find something or they want to sign up. And those are the only 2 things that they wanted to see happen from the homepage. And that as they went on from that, they started to simplify even further and get to the new paradigm that they want to be on, which is getting an app on your device so that it's much more habit forming. It's closer, it's easier to get to, the ability required is much less. Great model for that. Third part of the model is reward. You did something, you want to get something back. This is about instant gratification. Yes, we are in the youngest generation is all about instant gratification. Well, everyone's in instant gratification. You follow that call to action, whatever it is the promise, it needs to be delivered right now. No delays, no setbacks. So therefore the promise can be quite low as long as it's immediate. If I do something today and the promise is not going to be delivered for 2 weeks, I'm not quite as excited about it, and it's certainly not going to become muscle memory. If you can't form a habit-forming solution that is triggered at least weekly, if not daily, you're not going to get enough repetitiveness to form that muscle memory, to form it into a habit. So that's where the frequency jumps in. And this all works in an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. It's the area of the brain that gets stimulated in response to all these stimuli. So it's been studied heavily. And it gets stimulated by things that we crave. It's all about actually not the pleasure, it is the absence of pleasure that stimulates this area. It's the anticipation that stimulates. It is the fear of not receiving that stimulates. All of those raise our energy level. It gets our dopamines taking off, dopamine level raised. And it is whether or not that's going to be fulfilled that we most care about it. So in their studies, they came out that it is the stress of desire, it is the anticipation of what's about to come that fires our brain. They put people in functional magnetic resonance imaging machines and just gave the suggestion of, these were people that were chocolate cravers, and they gave the suggestions just through the auditory system inside the machine of chocolate and the luxury smoothness of it and the velvety and the rich flavor, and it's melting in your mouth. And that was enough to fire off the brains on all those people as if they had just instantly gratified and received the chocolate. And it gave them that dopamine response. When they actually fulfilled it and gave them chocolate, the response went away. That wasn't what drove them. It was the expectation. And that's what we're building on, is that sense of expectation. So find their itch so that you're ready to scratch it. So, what do you think is perhaps one of the most profound drivers of an itch? Did I just demonstrate it? Uncertainty. Didn't know what was coming. Intentionally didn't understand the question. Intentionally set up in a way to get you all thinking about it. And did you find that your heart rate went up? Did you get a little bit of sense of excitement in your body going? Did the adrenaline release? It did, because it started to trigger a little bit of your fight or flight. You're in an uncomfortable situation. You don't know what's coming next. Where's this guy going with this? It is that uncomfortableness that actually creates gambler's addiction. And what was determined was that if you actually set up to have stimulus that was randomized, that you got a much higher dopamine release and that the stimulus was predictable. Started out with the pigeons that poked on the lever and they got food. Every time they poked the lever, they got more food. Therefore, it became a habit for the pigeons. But in enhancing all of this, they went on to the next step, and that was they randomized it. Sometimes they got the food, and sometimes they didn't. And in response to that, the pigeons started hitting that button all the time. They're going to go for the food. And it's the same for the gamblers. You don't know when you're going to get the jackpot on the slot machine, so you start pulling it all the time. And it turns out the variability of the reward amplifies the dopamine response by a factor of 4. So if we don't know what's coming, there's a primordial part of our brain that is looking for a pattern.
On the topic of images,
Part of us surviving as back in the Stone Age days and earlier as cavemen was finding the patterns in our environment. It was the shapes of things in the trees that could be food. It was the look of a predator, the finding the shape of eyes, all those things that we have ingrained as our automatic responses. Having fear for spiders or snakes or wherever it is where your ancestors grew up is part of, hardwired into your brain. So it's anticipating some of those responses. And if you put some variability into it, then we're so busy trying to find a pattern that our brain goes into overdrive. That's actually part of what the addiction comes from. We get very excited about all that. So the nucleus accumbens is triggered by variability, and the author of the book has gone in to categorize it 3 different ways. So the first one is rewards of the tribe. That you're after social acceptance. You need the people around you to say, oh, this is way cool. You've accomplished things. And so it's that recognition from peers that's important. Second is the rewards of the hunt, that you actually accomplish things. And sorry, I'll keep moving on the slides. So in the rewards of the tribe, these are the 3 general categories. So empathic joy, and partnership, and competition. Just being a part of a team. And it's part of what keeps us involved with the Joomla project, is we're part of a team that does a bigger benefit to the world than any one of us could possibly do. And it's what makes us look for social rewards and helps us interact with other people. We value the recognition that comes from sharing our intellect. So that's why Stack Exchange and Stack Ideas and all the other Stack properties are so addicting for people, because we're looking for putting out that helpful answer that we've got because we've got a little bit of expertise, but we really want to see somebody upvote our answer so we're the top ranked answer on the page. That social recognition is what's so cool to all of us. The search for resources. We are hunters by design in the old days, and that sense of hunt still goes on. So we're looking to solve our patterns by hunting for the just right machine that's about to hit, or it could be any of another number of things. This is a clothing manufacturer, Ross, Dress for Less, and their model is not to be like every Target store is the same. They actually have ranges of racks where everything is in the same size, but they only have one item in each one, and so you have to spend your time treasure hunting. And occasionally you'll find the just right thing, but most of the time the inventory is not predictable. You have no idea whether you're going to find something. It's the variability that every time you go to that store, it's something different that makes their whole store addictive, to the point where people go to one store and then another store and then a third store in the same day because all the 3 stores have different inventory. Incredible model for it. We hunt for it online. Search results are a great example of that. We're trying to find solutions to issues. And then finally, it's the search for self-achievement. This is mastery. This is you being proud of your own accomplishment. And so it could be mastery in whatever game du jour has got your attention. It could be mastery in your skills. It could be mastery of reaching inbox count 0. For those who actually start with a low enough inbox, it actually might be an achievable goal, and people work at that religiously to try to have an empty inbox. And then there's people like me that's at 10,000 and they'll never get there. So variable rewards is perhaps the big keystone of this whole process, adding some degree of variability to the result so there's always a surprise. But it's not always the solution. Don't just use it as a free pass. Just don't add randomness, because the reward has to match the itch. If you're not solving the need that they came for, you're not going to build a pattern that's going to be built upon and emphasized. So make sure that you're matching up, that the reward you're giving is in line with exactly what they're most excited about. Finally, investment. So at the action stage, we wanted to keep the action extremely simple because we wanted it to be one click to get in there to get that immediate reward. But now, we're looking for ways that that we can get people to repetitively use this particular action, and they do it by investing time. And the investment of time will get a number of different paybacks. And the paybacks fall in two different categories. So one of the things that's done in this is to preload your next trigger. And what I mean by that is if you post to Instagram, what's likely to happen in the next few minutes? You may get a like. You may get a comment. You have created your own next trigger. By taking the action at step 2 and getting the immediate reward of the sense of gratification that you put something up, now you've all of a sudden queued yourself up that you're about to get a notification on your device or whatever it might be to go back to that site. That's what hooks you back in. Now you've got a repeating cycle. That every time you do something, all of a sudden there's going to be a trail of follow-up activity. People are going to be commenting or you know, responding to your sense of social need and social response.
It was smaller, faster. And then I started.
So every time that happens, it is an opportunity to have an external trigger be fired, and in response, we all go with it. So at the end of this process, we've got a trigger that repeats itself. And so it sets up the person for the next action. But we also look at investment. And investment is how well will this respond to me and meet my needs if I put a little bit more time into it. And with that, we get into investments into content. That if we fill out a profile that describes a little bit more of the types of things we're interested in. We're Airbnb, and we say, oh, we're kind of interested in traveling to a certain part of the world, and we tell a little bit about ourselves, that we are looking for small apartments on a low budget versus, you know, big monster houses. All of a sudden, the search results tune to us. The sites adapt to us, and because we've invested that little bit of time, we get a better experience, therefore we keep coming back. So we invest in a number of different ways. One is in content. The second is data, that we start putting in information. As soon as we start putting all of our accounting stuff into fresh books, all of a sudden we got to come back because we've got so much time and energy invested in it. We don't want to set up with another application. It's very hard to displace. So we've put in our data, so therefore we're much more inclined to respond when it comes back to that. Followers is perhaps one of the biggest investments that we could be making. That we're working real heavily to come up with our own tribe, our own people that we want to interact with. And once you've got yourself up to 10,000 followers or 1 million followers, who wants to give that up and walk away and start on another platform? It's not going to happen. And then finally, it's reputation. That if there's some sort of pure building reputation that you can have in the community that can come out of this, that too will keep someone coming back and staying stuck with it. And this is something they build over time. So yeah, there may be times that you went on eBay back when you only had 10 purchases under your belt, and you're trying to get, you're at 9, you want to get to that little gold star at 10 so that a buyer won't reject you, and you made an extra purchase that you really didn't need in seeking that reputations and reputation points. So with that, you end up with a lot of investment and preference. I'm getting desperately low on time. Point that it won't even turn on. There we go. So we want to be, one of the cycles of all this is we want to be consistent with our past behaviors. That's how it becomes effortless. That if we can keep following the activity the same way in the same sequence with the same clicks over and over again. You know, I was sitting down to Mike Demo last night, and he was constantly, you know, hitting the Control-T to open up his social media app, even if he didn't want to go there, just because he was bored at the moment, and that's the natural instinctive response that he needs.
So do you prefer max widths over min?
So with that, we can change the behaviors and get everyone involved with our activity. And I'm going to jump ahead real fast with just one closing item. And as we shape our user preferences and attitudes with enough frequency, we can form a habit. And how this fits into the Joomla world, and we'll jump past all of this stuff.
Just
Except I will
maybe
comment on
opinion
that.
on these sort of
Technology is
third-party
quite
extensions
possibly
that
the
go in and
next
try and correct
cigarette of our
everything
generation.
with all the CSS in the header. Are they heavy-handed, or do you think that they're...
Yeah. Jump to the demo. We're not going to have time for the demo, but I'll just wrap up real fast by sharing with you that how this worked in the world of Joomla. So the need came to develop a social app that someone who's undergoing substance abuse recovery will check into, and we form the habit while they're in intensive outplacement. So typical in Utah, someone who is a substance abuser will go through the rehab cycle 7 times before they're healthy. Average for Utah. The first month in rehab costs $42,000 in the state of Utah on average. It's a whole lot more expensive in California. So therefore a lot of people come to Utah for this. They will spend a month in intensive in residency, getting clean, getting sober, getting off of whatever it is, and then they're going to spend a month in intensive outplacement where all day, all evening, every day, they're starting to re-enter their life during the daytime, but each evening they're working on their sobriety and they're in a pure environment. And then all of a sudden, at the end of those 4 weeks, they're cast out into the open, ready to go survive again because they are magically cured. Wrong. They are cast out in there, and the best they've got are weekly AA meetings if they subscribe to that kind of a thought process, and a little bit of pure activity. And so that's the gap that needs to be filled. And so to build the habit, during the 1 month of intensive outplacement, they're starting to use the Recovery Elevated device to every day get another unexpected surprise. You're 48 days sober, and there's a different animation every single day to celebrate reaching that achievement of 48 days sober. And so there's a bit of curiosity about what might come. So that's one of the issues being solved. We use social engagement. You can't engage socially in your community because of fear that it'll get back to your boss and you'll get fired. So the anonymity of the internet actually helps here. So we're actually using avatars instead of faces, but building local communities of similarly situated people. Same number of days of sobriety, same kind of addiction that they're recovering from, same kind of family issues, and now paving the cow paths of what kind of things will alleviate that boredom. The solution that we deliver is actually things that are going to engage you, to give you a different thing to think about, to entertain you, as opposed to leave you wallowing in your boredom. Number one cause of substance abuse returning to it is boredom. Number 2 is isolation. Those are the 2 we're trying to solve with the application. And we're doing it with short form content. It is YouTube videos no longer than 3 minutes. It is a facial recognition camera in the phone that sees you getting bored, and we stop instantly and say, this doesn't seem to be interesting you. Would you rather see something on this or something on this? The courseware is not designed by single instructors leading to a degree at the end or a certificate or anything like that. It is the classic node graph structure of social media that says you can jump to any related topic, and all we're going to do is look at people like you that traveled in this area before, and based on the number of people who like the same clothing that you saw at Amazon or like the same topic while they're working on their sobriety, that they decide to we're paving the cow path and suggesting the next topics based on their situation. And then finally, we're downloading into the phone enough content that they can work in disconnected. They've got 8 hours of content that they can use when they're out of cell range. The flight attendant stuck in the hotel in Hong Kong with a mini bar and nothing else to entertain. That they're preloaded with based on whatever they last viewed. First concentric ring is high definition video. Second concentric ring is low definition video. And the final outside ring is a whole lot of text. But we recenter the map every time they hit a social connection, reload the high definition that's closest to what they just looked at or expressed interest in. And so they're constantly moving around the social graph of all the content that might be available, produced by anybody. And there happens to be a revenue model for the content producers, for all the coaches, life coaches, teachers, instructors that want to put content up. They've got a pay-per-view revenue stream. So they're constantly encouraged to keep refreshing and improving and try to get higher ranked content. That's the hook model used in the context of a Joomla application. Joomla is curating the engine, and so that's where the instructors go to put in all their content, but it doesn't deliver it. So that same SQL database talks to a Meteor application, is now delivering it to the phones
Hello?
and adapting the phones with PhoneGap to be native applications. So Joomla has a new life in this particular world. We're excited about version 4 coming along because it's going to have a much more robust API so that we don't have to share the database. And it can then bridge into some other applications that are used to build the social graph. That's it. Thank you for coming.